Hello, and welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, and you can reach us at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Of course, we're also on Facebook, the FAIRtax Guys there. If you could leave us a note or a comment, we'd certainly appreciate it. But, Ron, I have got a question for you.
Yeah.
What's with the red suit and the big fluffy beard and the funny little hat and the bag of coal in one hand and looks like a bag of goodies in the other? What in the world is going on here?
Ho, ho, ho. Well, in keeping with your idea to do something in line with Christmas, we've developed a naughty and nice list when it comes to the fair tax.
Oh, so this is going to be a kind of little fun off-the-wall episode today.
Yeah, and it's a good way to get out certain points about the fair tax and who's being naughty when it comes to the fair tax and who's being nice. And we have one group of people who's kind of like in between, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, we've got some people that are kind of naughty about the fair tax, and we've got some people that have been very, very nice. And, Santa Claus is watching us, so we're going to let these people remind them that if you are naughty about the fair tax, you're going to get a lump of coal.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, which list do you want to attack first?
Actually, Bob, this was your idea, so
Oh, okay.
It'd probably be more fun to do the naughty list.
It would be. Okay, we could do that.
I thought you'd agree with that.
No problem with that. Of course, there are a lot of contestants for that one, but I tell you what, right at the top of the list is the IRS. They are going to get a whole coal mine full of coal.
As an organization, yeah.
As an organization that treads on the Bill of Rights, that violates every right in the Bill of Rights, and is just, there's no excuse for that.
No, and we've talked about this on numerous occasions, and if I'm not mistaken, in the last one. We have the Bill of Rights, which ensures a fair trial by jury of your peers.
Presumption of innocence.
Presumption of innocence. Protection against unreasonable search and seizure and things like that. And all of those things are out the window with the IRS. Of course, Congress gave them permission to do that, but sometimes they're a little overzealous about it, especially, all the information that has come out over the past few years about the targeting scandals, where they're asking various organizations that they may not agree with politically, and they're asking for the tax-free...
tax-exempt status.
Tax-exempt status, thank you.
You're welcome.
Having a senior moment here. And so they drag them over the coals as these organizations are trying to get this tax-exempt 501c3, something like that. I feel lucky that the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association got their exempt status before all this nonsense started, because you just can't. Let's face it, we're trying to put the IRS out of business. It is our business to educate people with the goal of passing the fair tax, which would put the IRS out of business. So we got our status before all this nonsense started. But
while the higher-ups, the commissioner and folks like Lois Lerner that are responsible for a lot of the bad abuses that have gone on in the IRS, I get them a whole railroad hopper car full of coal.
I think the commissioner, he deserves notice in this radio broadcast all by himself. He has lied to Congress. He has stonewalled Congress. He has destroyed information after he was told to protect it. This guy needs to be impeached, and a few people in Congress have tried this, but Congress is kind of wishy-washy.
Well, maybe the new one will be a little bit more decisive. But
let's see.
Along this line, let me toss out a little caveat here. There are a lot of good people working for the IRS that are just trying to do their jobs.
Yep.
So we will spare them the coal. But it's the higher-ups that are directing the agency to do all these illegal and against the Bill of Rights things. They need to go away.
And I'll remind you of this story again. I know I've repeated it a couple times, but a few years ago, my daughter and her husband run a couple of small businesses. There was something she had to do at the IRS that she couldn't do by phone or by email. So she dropped the kids off work, went to the IRS office here in town, got there a little before they opened. The IRS agent comes in at 9 o'clock, unlocks his door, looks back at the people in the waiting room and said, if we had passed the fair tax, none of you folks would have to be here right now.
And I can retire. There we go.
So he gets it. And like Bob says, the rank and file workers at the IRS, they're trying to do their job the best way they can. They have an impossible job because they have to explain an impossible tax code. How do you explain 74 or 75,000 pages of tax, gobbledygook to people? It's impossible. So give credit to where credit is due. They're trying to do a reasonable job with an impossible situation, and they deserve recognition of that. But like Bob says, the higher ups
and the IRS as an agency, you got a lot of coal in your stocking, son.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our next little bag of coal. Will be handed out to people who demagogue the fair tax.
Oh.
Either out of ignorance, they just don't understand how it works, or in the worst case, they do know how it works and they are just flat out lying about what's in it and what it'll do. The demagogues, big lump of coal for you guys.
Yeah, and we talked about in previous episodes that fella that was at the time was going around Florida here talking about the flaws of the fair tax. And he just happened to be a lobbyist that, made money in his retirement while he was lobbying for certain efforts, on the tax code. I'm sure that had nothing to do with it, except that all the criticisms that he said he came up with of fair tax, he was dead wrong about those.
Let's see here. Let me write Mr. J.B.'s initials on this lump of coal, and we'll just let him have that.
Yeah. So, there are people like that who will demagogue a good idea such as the fair tax because it's going to hurt their cushy little corner of the world. Mm-hmm. Sometimes things have to change. When's the last time anybody bought flash bulbs for their camera?
It's been a while.
Things change. So, and a good change is the fair tax, and that's going to cause thousands of lobbyists to find other employment because a lot of those lobbyists are there to tweak the tax code in the direction of their employers or their the people they're working for. Okay, and they're going to have to find something else to do.
Oh, mercy. I tell you, a special subset of this, folks, is going to get an extra lump of coal, and that is all of the politicians in this past election cycle that ran dishonest ads against fair tax supporters. I've seen them. My opponent wants to add a 23% tax to the cost of everything you buy.
Yeah.
Without telling you the rest of the story, that they want to get rid of the income tax in the process. So everyone, the candidates that ran it, not even put the ad agencies that produce these dishonest ads, they get an extra lump of coal as well from us.
Yeah, Bob is right. There are some unscrupulous politicians. They want to get in there. They want to get that nice politician job at the federal level and spend a couple of years there, get a nice cushy retirement, get Cadillac health care, and however they can do it, however they can lie and demagogue about their opponent, if their opponent is a true fair tax supporter. And, one of the things that Bob and I are trying to do with Fair Tax Power Radio is educate people well enough so they cannot fall subject to this nonsense, all right? So that enough people know about the fair tax. So if a candidate says, as Bob said, my opponent wants to add a 20, usually they'll say 30, right? They'll inflate it,
Yeah.
And my opponent wants to do this and that and so forth. If enough people know about the fair tax and will not fall prey to that will come back and hit them in the face or bite them in another part of their posterior, but
their other face.
Yeah. So, we have no love, but we do have a lot of coal for candidates that lie about the fair tax.
Okay, and the fair tax is a nonpartisan issue. Yep. I mean, it has to be introduced in Congress by somebody, and that somebody has to belong to one of the two parties. But the fair tax was developed in the private sector, totally non-political thing. And this is starting to change, but there are still a good number of partisans out there who just because they think it comes from the other side, they're against it. They get coal as well.
Yeah. Fortunately, we've got people that go up to Washington once a month, and they're explaining to them that legislators, their staffers, and so forth, people in the know up in the D.C. circles, and they're making good headway. I mean, we're trying our best on FAIRtax Power Radio, and all the volunteers around the country are trying their best. But these folks are doing real well up in Washington, getting in front of the legislators and making them understand that, for instance, evasion is so bad with the current system, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And what are you going to do about it? You're going to turn this country into a militaristic state in order to enforce this thing that people hate? All right? If people don't like the fair tax, if people don't like the income tax and they find it very difficult to comply with, they're gonna get around it as best they can. So evasion is a huge problem.
Amen. So if you have taken an honest look at the fair tax and you've got problems with it, that's one thing. But if you're just saying, nope, other guy's idea, I don't like it, without really researching it for yourself, very, very few people, Ron, we've seen that we have explained the fair tax to, and once they understand it, they demand it.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll give the partisans a lump of coal. We got to keep moving along here. We got some good. How many sponsors does the fair tax have? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I believe it's at right now 83. Of course, there's only a few weeks of this Congress left.
Yeah, and how many congressmen and senators are there?
Total of House and Senate, 535.
So that's a lot of folks that could be co-sponsoring the fair tax that aren't, and I've got a little lump of coal for them as well. So if your congressman is not a co-sponsor of the fair tax, then you need to give him a lump of coal in his Christmas stocking. We need this. We really do.
Because does that congressman, if he's not he or she is not co-sponsoring, is because they're just not familiar with it, or because they're trying to protect the cushy little job that they got?
Or there's some that just don't want to take a position one way or the other because they're afraid of offending somebody and costing themselves votes.
We got a few of those here, don't we?
Oh, yes. I can think of one. In fact, I'm in his district. They just redistricted Florida. We'll work on him for sure.
Yep.
But, of course, also everybody that just uses the current system to reap benefits and power, and, of course, all the Congress people that had a hand in giving us this monstrosity of a tax reform or tax code that we got to deal with now. Everyone who's responsible for that now gets a lump of coal.
Yeah, that's right. And are we going to single out Paul Ryan?
I think you just did.
Yeah, okay, well.
Go ahead, explain why he gets one.
I've heard Paul Ryan on talk radio talk about the fair tax. I mean, he only mentioned it briefly, but Paul Ryan's a real smart guy, especially when it comes to numbers and taxation policy. He's a very smart guy. And as Speaker of the House, he's obviously very influential. He's third in line for the presidency. Okay, that's a big deal. And Mr. Ryan has his own plan out there, which we've talked about before, called The Better Way. Now, it just so happens that the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady has been a fair tax co-sponsor since '99. He knows what he's talking about. But he recently did an op-ed in Investors Business Daily, and he's talking about the new tax plan that they're planning, for the new year, when President-elect Trump is inaugurated and the new House is sworn in, and they're going to work on this thing called The Better Way. And he's talking about how he concentrates on small business. How do you stimulate small business by making the tax code more friendly? And obviously, I'm not going to go through the whole article, but the last part of it, he talks about the IRS. And he says, most local business owners cannot afford tax lawyers or accountants. They often have to call the IRS for help with tax-related questions. The customer service they receive today is abysmal. To the point where you're better off buying software and getting help that way. Anyways, under our plan, the IRS will be centered around distinct service units trained to help different groups of taxpayers. One will focus explicitly on providing top-quality assistance to businesses. Main Street job creators will be treated in the same way that they treat their own customers, with respect. Now,
I've got a bridge in Brooklyn I'll sell you if you believe that.
I applaud Mr. Brady, for having, the idea that this is going to happen, but does anybody believe that this IRS is suddenly going to become this warm, fuzzy institution that is just there to help you?
No, it needs to be a relic on the scrap heap of history is what it needs to be.
Yeah, it needs to be a bad memory. All right, and we've mentioned this before. Mr. Trump is talking about draining the swamp and preventing companies from going overseas. You implement the fair tax, all right?
And that fixes it.
It's so simple. I mean, you reduce your corporate tax rate to 0. You reduce your tax compliance cost by 80 or 90%. You've accomplished a whole bunch of stuff that they're talking about right now.
Oh, mercy. I tell you, well, we're about halfway through, a little over halfway through. We got to get to our nice list.
Yeah.
And so we got lots of candy canes to give out. And, of course, at the very top of the nice list are the multiplied thousands of FAIRtax volunteers across the country that are giving of their time, giving of their effort, in a lot of cases giving of their money to try to get rid of this income tax and get the fair tax passed.
And let me remind everybody that, for instance, in our state organization, and I believe all the state organizations, there are no paid positions. We don't have an office. We do have a mailbox, okay? So you can mail stuff to the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. The national group, Americans for Fair Taxation, there's no office rental. They do, again, have a mailbox that you can mail stuff to. There's not one single person that gets a salary for their work on AFFT. Not one. All right, and we can vouch for like Randy Fisher, who's the chair of the Marketing and Communications Committee. This guy puts in like 50 to 60 hours a week doing strictly fair tax stuff, and then the rest of it he's working on his little farm.
Oh yeah,
and
of course he's got lots of energy. He can do that.
Like Bob says, there's thousands of fair tax volunteers all across the country. And they're all going to get candy canes. They're all going to get something really nice from Santa Claus.
And you just mentioned Randy Fisher. Part of me was wondering, do we really want to get into the business of naming individuals? Because once you get into that, you could go on all day with that, because there are some really, really fine people that are involved in the fair tax thing. But we have got to absolutely positively mention Steve Hayes.
Yeah.
He is the president of AFFT. We've invited down to his home. We've been in his home twice to talk to him on FAIRtax Power Radio. The fair tax actually was hatched and implemented in mid-'90s. Became a bill in Congress for the first time in 1999. Steve Hayes predates all of that. He's been fighting against the income tax even before the fair tax was even begin to have been thought of.
That's right.
So, Steve, extra candy canes for you, sir.
Yep. And we can't forget, I mean, as Bob said, we can't mention everybody, but there are some sincere notables. Bortz and Linder, Neil Bortz and John Linder. Neil Bortz had that radio program before he retired, and he talked about the fair tax. That's where I learned about it.
And then they wrote the book.
Yeah. Whenever I had a chance, I'd tune into his radio, and he would perchance, talk about the fair tax, and yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. And then they came out with the book, he and John Linder. Now, John Linder was a congressman at the time. John Linder is not an attorney. John Linder is now a retired dentist. So he's not one of these attorneys that went to Congress just so he could get a nice cushy job. He really tried to do stuff. So Bortz and Linder sat down and wrote the first and the second fair tax book. So give a big hat tip to them. And lots of candy canes for them, because it's through them, the Bort's radio show and the book that they published, that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people across the country have learned about the fair tax. And we encourage you, go on to any of the websites, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, any place where you can get a book, and look for the fair tax book by Bortz and Linder. It's a good read. I mean, you can read it very quickly. And it really explains stuff. And you're going to have the same reaction to it that Bob and I had when we read that book. Is like, this makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. Why didn't they think of this before? Why haven't we done this? And that's the other thing. Why haven't we done this already?
That was exactly the question my mother asked me after she read the book. Why are we not doing this now? It makes so much sense. And, of course, Linder has retired. We've got to mention Rob Woodall. Give him a candy cane or two, because he has taken John Linder's place as the primary sponsor in the House of the fair tax and has done an amazing job with it.
Yep. And Rob Woodall is now the primary sponsor in the House for H.R. 25, and in the Senate, it's Senator Jerry Moran. He is the primary sponsor of the fair tax legislation in the Senate. And I'd just like to mention, I'm going to take opportunity to editorialize, I'd like to congratulate my congressman, Ted Yoho, because he's a good guy. He is not only a co-sponsor, he is an ardent promoter of the FAIRtax.
Yeah, he carries cards around in his pocket and hands them out to people.
Yeah.
He's also, talked to us twice on FAIRtax Power Radio. Yep. Really a good guy.
Yep. So there are people up in Washington that have our best interests in mind. Now, our primary issue is the FAIRtax. All right. I know there's a lot of other very, very important things that go on in Washington. And as we mentioned before, Mr. Yoho told us once that even though Congress passes about 300 laws a year, that's part of the tornado of 10,000 bills. Typically in the ballpark of 10,000 bills that are submitted to Congress. When he first said that, we thought he misspoke.
Uh-huh.
I can't imagine.
I'd ask him again, did you really mean that? Uh-huh.
10,000 bills that congressmen and so forth are proposing all the time. Holy cow. And then, of course, we got our friends in the bureaucracy that we talked about. Anyways, that was last week's episode. We also want to thank and endorse for a candy cane is our podcast listeners.
Oh, yeah. We wouldn't be here if people weren't out listening to us.
Yeah, that's right. And I was showing Bob earlier today that our listenership is growing, and FAIRtax Power Radio is growing. We have gotten, our primary platform is on Spreaker, and a lot of people listen to us there. That's a free website. It's like Speaker with an R, Spreaker.com. You go there and you look for FAIRtax Power Radio, and it's there. Spreaker has also allowed us, they've automated this process so that as soon as we post an episode every Friday morning on Spreaker, then it goes out to iTunes, it goes out to iHeartRadio, goes out to SoundCloud, goes out to YouTube, and it does all that stuff automatically. It's great. It saves us so much time. So our hats off to our podcast listeners. Thank you. And please keep telling other people. We get some nice emails from these folks.
Yeah, second candy cane to the folks that have given us feedback.
Yeah, that's right.
FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com is our email address, and, of course, our Facebook page as well. Several people have sent us really nice notes, so they'll get a second candy cane if you're actually – this is intended to be a two-way communication.
Yeah, that's right.
If you've got questions or comments or stories about the IRS would you like to share, we'd certainly love to hear from you. And you get an extra candy cane for those of you who have done that.
Yeah. And
also the folks that are members of the 1040 Club.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely they get extra candy canes for that. The 1040 Club, it's where you have committed to donate $10.40 a month towards getting rid of the 1040 entirely. Mm-hmm. Those people are really the bedrock on which this organization is built.
And that sustaining membership in AFFT is very important. AFFT they have been struggling in past years. It used to be run by the three millionaires that started AFFT in Texas. Two of those fellows have passed away, and AFFT is now a totally grassroots supported organization, totally. And the sustaining memberships are very important because that shows that AFFT is a strong, viable organization, and that is attracting other investors. So we can't emphasize that enough. All right, the 1040 Club is really important, and you can get to that by going to bigsolution.org. Bigsolution.org, that's where you can get involved. And believe me, this is not going to happen unless thousands and millions of you folks get involved in this and tell Congress we don't want any other tax reform except the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax is the only true reform. We don't need you tweaking the current system, and just making a change here and a change there. Yeah, Paul Ryan's better way, sure, that will make things better and it will stimulate business, but how long will it last? Maybe as long as the Congress that passes it. Max 2 years. All right.
Yeah, I still love Kerry Bauer's analysis. You're going from an income and payroll tax system administered and enforced by the IRS, to a personal and corporate income and payroll tax system administered and enforced by the IRS.
Yeah.
Wonderful major tax reform there.
That doesn't qualify as reform. It qualifies as tweaking the current system.
Indeed. Well, I've got one candy cane left.
Yeah.
And here it is. You can have it. You have been a good co-host for all the time we've been on Fairtax Power Radio. Appreciate your time and your effort and your support here.
Oh, well, there would be no Fairtax Power Radio without Bob Paxton. I mean, this is his brainchild. And he's the radio guy that knows how to make this. I'm sitting in front of this panel, and I have no idea what this thing does. But, Bob knows.
Yes, that is my Stereo 80 broadcast console.
Yeah. So I come here to the studio, which is in Bob's house, and he's got this great equipment, and we produce a podcast that sounds pretty darn good. And then he sends it to me, and I make sure it gets up on Spreaker. And we're going to be doing some other stuff. We're going to be promoting this show on Facebook and Spreaker. And also, just a fair warning, we are looking into Facebook Live.
Yes, I've heard about that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to do it yet, but we'll figure it out. Actually, yeah.
Yeah, well, at one point I didn't know how to drive a car either, but I figured it out, much to my parents' chagrin. And so we're going to do something with Facebook Live. I've seen other people do this. I've seen Trey Gowdy do it. I've seen Mark Levin do it. And we're going to do something with that, and you're going to hear more about the FairtaX guys, the men behind the mustaches, on FairtaX Power Radio. So
okay, well, that should be, and then we'll figure out why we're on the radio instead of television, right? Okay, real quickly, you better mention your wife's webinar.
Oh yeah, and Elaine doesn't get all the credit for this. The two guys in Orlando, Larry Walters and Mark Maneri, they've been doing these webinars for I think 7 years now. And it's a monthly webinar. It's absolutely free. It's usually the fourth Thursday of the month, but of course during Thanksgiving and Christmas you can't do it, so there's another time. So go to fairtax.org/webinar, fairtax.org/webinar, and see when the next one is. By the time this show publishes, the next one is going to be in January, and it probably will be the fourth Thursday. They go over the webinar. They go over the FairtaX first, give you a brief overview. Then they take questions. You can type in questions, and so it's interactive. And then they go over a special topic. And these guys do a real good job. There's very few people in the country that are more knowledgeable about the FairtaX than Larry Walters. It's pretty amazing.
And real quickly, there's going to be a lot of online shopping here in the next few weeks. FairtaxRewards.com.
Yep, I just did some yesterday on that. FairtaxRewards.com. If you're going to do some online shopping, first go to FairtaxRewards.com. Sign in with an account. It's free. And then from there, you say you're going to look for something at Walmart or Target or Home Depot or something like that, okay? Or you just want to search for a particular item and you don't care where you buy it. If you first go to FairtaxRewards.com and do your searching and then go to the store's website, order it, either you can pick it up at the store, you can have it sent to your house, whatever, then you'll get a small stipend. I think I built my account up to like $11, okay? So, and AFFT will get a small stipend. So you can shop for bargains online, make it convenient, and help the Americans for fair taxation.
And the price is the same. There's nothing added on.
And usually you find some nice sales there.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm about all out of coal, and I'm about all out of candy canes.
Yeah.
And we're about out of time.
Yeah. Funny
Again,
how that works.
We thank you so much for listening to FairtaX Power Radio on all of our various platforms, Spreaker and iHeartRadio and YouTube, and I don't remember where you put them all. But anyway, do appreciate that a lot. Again, our address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com, or our Facebook page. Leave us a comment, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody out there.
Yep.
All right.
And keep your eyes open on our Facebook page for that Facebook Live event coming up.
All right, and that's going to wrap it up. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
We are the FairtaX Guys, reminding you that the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
you will demand it.
Fair tax is coming. Don't stand